In this video, we discuss horrific things that were normal to Chinese concubines. It was socially unacceptable and unlawful for a man to have more than one wife at the same time in pre-modern China. But it was allowed for a man to have a concubine as an intimate partner and childbearer. This was for breeding male offspring to ensure the regime. Concubines were not wives. Imperial concubines were kept by emperors in the Forbidden City. They had different ranks and were traditionally guarded by eunuchs to ensure that they could not be impregnated by anyone but the emperor. Chinese emperors all needed to get approval from the empress consorts when they wanted to sleep with concubines. In the Han Dynasty, emperors born to concubines were not allowed to title their mother the Empress Dowager. Concubines were not allowed to raise their own children, not allowed to leave the imperial palace, and not allowed to live with their children. Concubines were not allowed to be buried in the family tomb and not allowed to reserve sacrifice from offspring after death. Concubines who had been elevated to empress consorts still could not have the full right as the original Orthodox empress consorts. Why were concubines and wives taken in the China's Forbidden City? China's Forbidden City is a series of palaces in the heart of Beijing. The Chinese emperors and their households lived there as well as the imperial palace during the Ming and Qing dynasties. The Forbidden City's construction started in 1406 and was finished in 1420, a span of 14 years. The complex, which has 980 buildings total and has an area of about 72,000 square meters, includes the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the Hall of Central Harmony, and the Hall of Preserving Harmony. Sequestered in the imperial rooms deep within the Forbidden City were female members of the imperial family, including the empress, concubines, and various female attendants. This was situated in the northern section of the palace complex and was referred to as the inner court. The inner court was a segregated section of the palace that was off-limits to most visitors and strictly guarded. The emperor had to provide permission for female inhabitants of the inner court to depart, and they were under constant watch from eunuchs, castrated male slaves. The inner court was a rigorously regulated and highly regimented place to live. How were Chinese concubines selected? Like most questions regarding Chinese history, the answer is, it depends. It depends on the dynasty, and sometimes different emperors within the same dynasty have different methods of selecting concubines. This is a gigantic topic that touches a lot of different aspects of ancient Chinese court life. Someone could literally write a book about it. There is a very, very oversimplified answer. The selection process for imperial concubines in ancient China varied depending on the dynasty and the emperor's personal preferences. By Qin dynasty and before, 2nd century BC, concubines were usually recommended by noblemen, courtiers, and government ministers. The powerful noble families would send their young daughters to court and became concubines for the emperor. Starting with Han Dynasty, 2nd century BC to 2nd century AD, in addition to girls from noble families and government officials, the emperor started to collect young, beautiful girls from all over the country. This was taken as a yearly tax. Every year, courtiers were sent out to the country searching for beautiful girls. We didn't have a lot of records on how the women recruited, but we do have some records about how concubines were evaluated. There were some pretty strict qualifications, include clear skin, no smallpox scars or other scars, no eczema, no acne, no rash, no athlete feet, no weird moles or birthmarks, and etc. Smells good, no bad breath, no weird body odor. Good appearance based on traditional and rules. Can't be too fat or too skinny. Need to have good posture and graceful in manners. All of these girls would end up servants in court. Some of them might get promoted in ranks and became concubines. Most of them will stay servant and maid for their entire life. Probably never met the emperor. Fast forward to the Ming Dynasty, 14th, 17th century. This was when we started to have some really detailed and interesting records on how the concubines were selected. What was different about Ming Dynasty was that Ming Emperor had seen how powerful noble families would routinely send their daughters to court and become concubines and mothers of princes and future emperors. This weakens the power of the emperor. So Ming emperors favored picking girls from normal, sometimes even poor families, in order to curb the ambitions of the powerful nobleman families. It didn't always work. There were plenty of concubines during that time that came from noble families. But we did see more commoners entered the palace. Regardless of where the girls come from, the selection process was the same. We have some really nice records from Emperor Tianqi, Ming Shizong, 1605–1627. When Tianqi Emperor was of age, the court eunuchs were sent out to the country and choose girls from age of 13 to 16. Here is the process of how it's done. Round 1, the eunuchs chose 5,000 girls. The girl's family received a sum of money from the crown to cover the travel expenses, so the family could send the girls to Beijing, the capital city. Round 2, the eunuchs separated the girls by their age and lined them up based on height and review their general appearance. Those who are too tall, too short, too skinny or too fat will be removed. This round will remove about 1,000 girls. The girls will be sent back to their family, their travel expenses covered by the crown. Same to all the disqualified girls. Step 3. The eunuchs continue to examine the remaining girls, including their face, hair, skin. The girls were asked to introduce themselves, so the eunuchs would listen to their voices, their dialects, the way they talk, and carry themselves. This round will remove 2,000 girls. Step 4. The eunuchs would measure the girls' bodies, the length of their arms, legs, feet. If they have thick wrists or ankles, they'll be removed. By this point, about 1,000 girls left. Step 5. The older palace servant women would examine the girls in private, made sure their breasts and private parts were normal and appealing, that they didn't have any weird body odor. 300 girls remained after round 5. Step 6. The 300 girls will remain in the palace as entry-level concubines. The emperor will send special court servant women to observe these girls for a month, see if they're gentle, kind, can read and write, graceful, etc. By the end of the month, 50 girls will remain and become full-fledged concubines. The 250 disqualified girls are sent home. Step 7. The emperor's mother, the Dowager Queen, came to meet with the 50 girls, chat with them, quiz them about their knowledge of literature, art, or ask them to play instruments or play Go with the Queen. The Dowager Queen chose 3 girls, Zhang, Wang, and Duan. At this point, the 47 other girls were given a choice. Either they'll receive a bunch of money and go home to their parents, or they can choose to remain in the palace and become low to mid-level concubines. Step 8. The emperor finally meets the 3 beautiful young girls, and he'll choose which one was his queen, and the other 2 will become high-level concubines. Once a girl was chosen, a betrothal ceremony would be held, and she would be officially engaged to the emperor or the high-ranking official. They were expected to obey strict rules and follow strict protocols, such as bowing to the emperor and his mother, addressing the emperor in a certain manner, and observing a strict hierarchy among the other wives and concubines. One of the main duties of the emperor's wives and concubines was to bear him a son, who would become the heir to the throne. The birth of a male child was considered a significant event, and was celebrated with great pomp and ceremony. Unfortunately, concubines were often treated like things. In the history of ancient China, there are many examples of emperors mistreating their concubines and wives. For instance, Emperor Tianqi chose Zhang, and Zhang Yan became the queen of the Ming Empire at the age of 15, 1621. She's one of the most beautiful queens in Chinese history. Zhang Yan's life was a tragic on Yi, though. She was poisoned by a powerful eunuch when she was pregnant. She survived the miscarriage, but unable to have children. Without an heir, Queen Zhang persuaded her husband to pass the throne to his brother Zhu Yujian, Chongzhen. When Li Zicheng attacked and sacked Beijing, Zhang Yan hanged herself in her bedroom before the rebels broke into the Forbidden City. She was 38 when she died. Also, there was some rumor about her husband. Emperor Tianqi favored male company. He's probably gay or at least bisexual. Might explain why he didn't have a lot of offsprings by his many concubines. Qing dynasty's method was similar to the Ming dynasty, in that the girls were selected from mostly commoners' families. They'll go through a few rounds of selection and eventually made it to the emperor. It's just not nearly as big the scale, no more 5,000 girls beauty contest. The founder of the Sui, 541–604 CE, the Wen emperor of the Sui, who unified China after centuries of chaos, was, in the first half of his reign, a brilliant leader and strategist. He was also deeply in love with his wife, and rightly afraid of her. She was also brilliant, but possessive. She was 14 when they got married. He was a few years older. She made him swear never to have any other women. He had concubines, but did not sleep with them. But he got itchy. There was one young lady who excited him so much that he did the deed with her. A few days later, the missus found out, and when the emperor was elsewhere, she had the young lady murdered. When the emperor found out, he was so distraught that he leapt onto his horse and galloped out the gates. A couple officials got on their horses and chased after him. When they found him, he was sulking under a tree. He said, "I quit. I'm the emperor, and I don't have the freedom that your typical man in the street has. I quit. Find someone else to be emperor." This was the first recorded use of the word freedom in Chinese. Anyway, they persuaded him to go back to the palace and kiss and make up. But the missus still hated anybody to have concubines like the heir apparent did, so their second son hid his pretty concubines and let his parents see only the old washer-lady types. This pleased his mother. When she died, the Wen emperor went to town, and when he died, the second son, who had become the heir apparent, took the throne and brought out the concubines. But the Wen emperor was the exception. The founder of the Qin-Jin dynasty, around 250 CE, had so many concubines that he didn't know who to choose. So he hitched a goat to a cart and let the goat decide whose room to go to. The concubines got smart and started putting fragrant grasses by the door to attract the goat and bring the old goat. A Tang emperor had literally thousands of concubines. He would release a butterfly and let the butterfly choose, so the concubines put fragrant flowers in their hair to attract the butterfly. The life of a concubine was not easy. The best possible luck they could have would be to attract the emperor and have a son. Then they would play a deadly game to maneuver their son to become heir apparent. If they became an emperor's mother, they had it made. The exception was the northern way. To avoid the emperor's mother giving all the power to her relatives, when an heir apparent was chosen, his mother had to drink poison to commit suicide, thereby traumatizing her son. To keep the influence of concubines to the minimum, during the Qing, when an emperor visited a concubine, a eunuch would stand outside the door and chase him out after 15 minutes. He could not spend the night with her. Isn't that awful? If a concubine was sort of lucky, she could gain the emperor's favor and fight to protect herself from the other concubines. If she was not lucky, she would just spend her days plotting and scheming and doing embroidery and maybe painting and singing and just passing the days. She'd have a roof over her head and plenty to eat and wear, but it must have been dreary. They could not leave the palace. It was the Xuan emperor of the Tang. His concubines sewed uniforms and whatnot for the army. There were thousands of concubines anyway, so some soldier on the frontier was horrified to find a note in the pocket of his new uniform saying, "Hi, I'm a palace concubine and terribly lonely." To keep his head on his shoulders, the soldier immediately reported it to his superior, and so on up the line all the way to the emperor. Fortunately for her, the Xuan emperor was quite a romantic. He summoned the concubine to him and married her off to the soldier with plenty of nice gifts. He didn't know who she was anyway. Did the ancient Chinese wives of kings get jealous of the king's concubines? In ancient times it was expected, and a matter of course, that emperors in China had multiple wives, consorts, noble ladies, and concubines at their disposal. And yes, there was a hierarchy of women. They were given money and daily food allotment based on their status. The higher the rank, the less work was required of them. Men of high rank were allowed more than one wife, and men of the common people who had no male heir by the age of 40 were allowed to take a second wife. But for the sake of time and space, I'll deal with the emperor. An empress must be of noble birth and her family in good standing. These were sometimes chosen by the emperor's mother or highly influenced by her wish, and were not a match made for love, but made for political benefit. Women were expected to excel in 4 areas: fidelity, cautious speech, industriousness, and graceful manners. A woman's virtue was a particularly valued attribute in Chinese society. Thus his women were chosen based on their virtues.
His other women could be chosen from the common women, usually based on their beauty. Theoretically, he could have access to upwards of thousands of women, but usually he only consummated sexual relationships with a dozen or so. Of these, he may have 2 or 3 favorites at any given time. Jealousy could run rampant in his harem. Women were jealous of each other and of each other's children. Some women in the harem would even go so far as to kill other women and children of the royal family. The Empress Dugu Qiluo is also famous in Chinese history for her strong jealousy. On occasion, an emperor would come to love one of his women above all the others. Such was the case of Yang Guifei. She was the daughter of a census official in Sichuan and was the concubine of the Emperor Xuanzong's son. When Xuanzong saw her, he became obsessed and eventually took her as his own concubine. He loved her above all others. He expanded her palaces, had lychees delivered weekly just because she liked them, gave her family jobs in government, and doted on her to the exclusion of all else. When rebellion in his own household threatened the dynasty, his military demanded the death of Yang Guifei, blaming her for their kingdom's decline. The emperor didn't want her to die, but she was executed. He never recovered from his loss of her. He died a broken man a few short years later. Still, some women managed to keep the emperor monogamous to the exclusion of any other woman. Emperor Xiaozong, or Hongzhi of the Ming, was the only emperor in Chinese history to only have one wife. According to imperial tradition, the empress and concubines live in a separate section of the palace from the emperor. Xiaozong, though, lived with his wife Empress Jiang after their marriage. Historical records show they would get up, sleep, read books, draw, and discuss history and politics together. I'm sure women were quite thankful when monogamy became the norm. I know I'd have made for a very jealous woman if I had to compete for my husband's affection. I'd declare myself his wife, mistress, concubine, and girlfriend, so he wouldn't have time for another woman. In ancient China, how did the concubines and consorts who never or rarely got picked up by the emperor deal with their sex-starved life? Were affairs with other men possible and common? Yes, there were instances of imperial concubines sneaking out for some side sausage, but these were the exceptions, not the rule. They weren't the rule because the punishment for this infraction was almost always death. Not many girls are willing to risk decapitation just for some extra meat on the side. They kept busy with other things, like embroidery. Unlike today, there were much less media and materials that were salacious. Erotic books and drawings were mostly intended for men, in the imperial household, only for the emperor. So it's not like they were already bored and also sexually stimulated. It was nearly impossible for them to have affairs with other men. Aside from the emperor and princes of young age, the only other men in the inner palace were eunuchs. Other males had no reason to visit the inner palace. Doctors would be the only males that have legitimate reasons to see the concubines. This is particularly true for Ming and Qing dynasties. If you ever visit the Forbidden Palace, you'll see that in the inner quarter where the imperial family lived is separated from the area where the emperor held court. Further, the entire Forbidden Palace is, well, forbidden to ordinary folks, hence the name. Whatever temptations they or their potential paramours might have would be severely tempered by the consequences of discovery, death for themselves and possibly for their families. That said, affairs with other men are possible, though not common. One source of candidates are eunuchs. Some sources do say that sometimes the surgery leaves some stuff behind, or stuff grows back, and these eunuchs become popular with concubines. By the Qing dynasty, there are physical exams that eunuchs have to go through every year to make sure everything is really gone. Another source of male lovers would be monks. Concubines usually didn't leave the palace, but they could if they went to the imperial Buddhist temples. Xu Jiaopei was married to the crown prince of Liang, and she carried on affairs with a monk and some others. Her husband refused to make her empress, even though she was the crown princess, and later forced her to commit suicide. If a woman came from a powerful family and is powerful herself, or had a weak husband, she might carry on affairs. For example, Empress Jia Nanfeng was supposed to have had handsome young men snuck into the palace and had affairs with them. Her husband was developmentally disabled. Those are the notable examples. However, I can find no reference for other confirmed cases. So affairs were possible, not common, and practically during the Ming and Qing dynasty. How were female servants treated in ancient China? According to historical records, there were three main uses of maids in ancient times, namely 1. Handyman. This kind of maid is mainly responsible for the food and daily life of her master, from internal housework to external cleaning, which are their work areas. In the master's travel, they are also often responsible for the management and carrying of luggage, the most relaxing one. 2. Entertainment tools. There are records of such maids in northern history. Qinghe Wang Gaoyue is a master of art. He usually likes to watch programs such as singing and dancing. In order to make the master happy, many maids in his mansion began to learn singing and dancing, performing in front of the owner, in order to compete for favor and get attention. 3. Slave. As the name suggests, this maid exists to satisfy the master's desires. Many film and television works have described this kind of maidservant, but it is actually wrong to say that you can go to the sky as soon as you are pregnant. Men like girls who are younger than themselves. This is also true in ancient times. Once pregnant, it means that they can no longer be lucky by the master, and the master will additionally find new goals to solve their physiological needs. They will all end up being expelled from the mansion or given off to others after they have given birth. In ancient times, the outstanding maid was easily coveted by the male master. This may be due to the influence of some men's natural sex, or the maid wants to seduce the host to get benefits for himself. Some of them may be accepted as concubines by the host, and their status will be promoted. Some will be framed and killed due to the hostile jealousy of the hostess, and some will continue to be the original due to the empathy of the hostess. There are also willing or forced to become sex slaves of the host family, different fate. For example, the maids in Dream of Red Mansions. In the same family environment, their ranks are divided into 3, 6, 9, etc. According to the different masters served, Yingchun, Yuanyang, Ping'er, Sijuan, Xiaohong, Siki, Xiangling, Qingwen ranks from high to low. Among these maids, those who were slightly beautiful and were close to the male host Jia Baoyu in the family were all tragically dead. At a young age, the female host, Mrs. Wang, ended her life. Because Jia Baoyu is the future head of the family and has a distinguished status. In the future, he will be matched with everyone who is the right one. In the environment at the time and in the eyes of these masters, these maidservants have a low status, and they are almost like dogs. It can be disposed of at will, and of course, it cannot seduce Jia Baoyu, let alone have an affair with him. That's it for today. Remember to support our channel. Please subscribe. Tell us in the comments what topic you'd like to hear next.